There is a brown bottle sitting in your medicine cabinet right now. It cost you about $1.50 at the drugstore, maybe $2. You bought it to clean a scrape on your knee or disinfect a cut on your hand, and it has been sitting there ever since, quietly doing absolutely nothing. What I am about to tell you is that the bottle you have been ignoring for years is one of the most powerful gardening tools in existence. And the fact that nobody at your local garden center has ever mentioned it to you is not an accident. The fungicide industry, the pesticide manufacturers, the big box garden retailers, they have absolutely no financial incentive to tell you that a product you can buy for pocket change outperforms chemicals they charge you 15, 20, sometimes $30 a bottle to sell you. I have been doing this for 25 years. I have watched people pour money into treatments that do not work, and I have watched their gardens fail. And I have known the whole time that the solution was simpler than anyone was willing to admit. Today that changes. And before we go any further, I need you to drop your US state or your USTA hardiness zone in the comments right now, because what works in Georgia is not always the same story as what works in Oregon. And I want to give you advice that actually applies to where you are growing. Now stay with me through this entire video, because around the middle of this, I am going to show you exactly how to rescue a plant that is sitting on the edge of death, a plant most gardeners would throw in the trash, using something that costs less than a cup of coffee. Do not leave before we get there. Let me start at the beginning because I want you to understand what hydrogen peroxide actually is before we talk about what it does in your garden. When you buy that brown bottle at the drugstore marked 3% hydrogen peroxide, what you are holding is water with one extra oxygen atom attached. That is it. The chemical formula is H2O2, two hydrogen atoms, two oxygen atoms. Regular water is H2O. The difference is that one extra oxygen atom, and that single atom changes everything. When hydrogen peroxide contacts organic material, the cell wall of a fungus, the body of a pest larva, the membrane of a harmful bacterium, it releases that oxygen atom in a burst. It oxidizes what it touches. It destroys the cellular integrity of pathogens on contact. And then, because this is the part that no chemical company wants you sitting with for too long, it breaks down completely into water and oxygen. Nothing left behind, no residue, no chemical buildup in your soil, no toxic runoff, just water and air. That is the foundation of everything I am going to show you today. Hold on to that idea because it is the reason this works so differently from everything they sell you on the shelf. The first use: improving germination rates and protecting seedlings from damping off. Let me tell you something about damping off, because I think most gardeners have experienced it without knowing what to call it. You start seeds indoors. Everything looks fine for the first week. Then one morning, you walk over to your seed trays and half your seedlings are lying flat. They were upright yesterday. Today, they are collapsed at the base of the stem. The stems looks pinched, almost like something squeezed it from outside. That is damping off, and it is caused by fungal pathogens that live in the soil and attack seedlings at the soil line the moment conditions favor them. Warm temperatures, high moisture, limited airflow. Those three things together, and damping off moves fast. Most gardeners lose an entire tray before they figure out what happened, and then they buy a fungicide to treat the next round, and the cycle continues. Here is where hydrogen peroxide changes that completely. A light misting of diluted hydrogen peroxide applied to the soil surface of your seed trays creates a surface environment that those fungal pathogens cannot establish in. The oxidizing action kills spores before they colonize the seedling stem. And because the peroxide breaks down into water and oxygen immediately after contact, you are not leaving any chemical residue in the growing medium that could interfere with germination or harm the emerging root system. I have started seeds for over 2 decades. Damping off used to be an accepted loss every spring. It does not have to be. For prevention, mix 1 tablespoon of standard 3% hydrogen peroxide into 1 quart of water. Apply it as a fine mist to the surface of the seed starting mix every other day until seedlings have developed their first set of true leaves. Keep the misting light. You are not trying to drench the soil. You are treating the surface where the pathogen lives. If you already have an active case of damping off moving through a tray, remove the affected seedlings immediately. They cannot be saved, and they will spread the infection. Then treat the remaining seedlings with a slightly stronger solution, 2 tablespoons per quart applied carefully at the soil line for 3 consecutive days. Thin your remaining seedlings to improve airflow and back off on moisture. That combination stops the outbreak. The second use: foliar treatment for fungal disease. Nobody told you this, and I want to be direct with you about it. When you see powdery mildew on your squash, when you see rust on your roses, when your tomato plants develop early blight, Your instinct is probably to go to the garden center and pick something up. And they will sell you something in a green or blue bottle that costs anywhere from $12 to $25. And it will work for about 3 days, and then you will be back. That is not a coincidence. That is a business model. Hydrogen peroxide used correctly as a foliar spray is a potent contact treatment for every fungal and bacterial disease I just named. Here is the mechanism. Those diseases are alive. Powdery mildew is a fungal organism. The rust you see on a leaf is a living pathogen. When the oxidizing action of hydrogen peroxide contacts those organisms, it ruptures their cell walls. It does not slow them down. It does not weaken them. It destroys them on contact. And because it breaks down into water and oxygen, it leaves no chemical residue behind that builds up in the leaf tissue or disrupts your plant's natural biology. Now, I will be honest with you because that is what this channel is built on. Hydrogen peroxide is a contact treatment. It hits what it touches. It does not have systemic action the way some chemical fungicides claim to, so thorough coverage matters. You need to get the undersides of the leaves, the stems, the crowns of the plant. Fungal spores colonize the underside of foliage first because that is where they are sheltered from UV light. If you spray only the tops of leaves, you are going to miss where the problem lives. Use a pump sprayer, not a trigger bottle, and take your time coating every surface. For disease prevention, mix half a cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide into 1 gallon of water. That is your maintenance spray. For an active fungal infection that has already taken hold, you need a stronger solution. 8 to 12 tablespoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. Spray the affected plant for 3 consecutive days, then skip a day. Then come back with a different preventative, baking soda solution, diluted neem oil, or a sulfur-based spray to keep the disease from returning. That rotating protocol is what actually stops an outbreak, not a single application of anything. The third use, eliminating fungus gnat larvae in container soil. I want to talk about fungus gnats specifically because if you have ever grown anything in a container, indoors or out, you have almost certainly dealt with them. Those tiny black flies hovering around your soil. They seem harmless. They are not. The adult flies are annoying but mostly cosmetic. The larvae are the real problem. Fungus gnat larvae live in the top layer of moist soil and they feed on organic matter and, critically, on plant roots. In a container with a young seedling or a recently transplanted specimen, a larval infestation can produce the same symptoms as root rot: wilting, yellowing, failure to thrive. People buy yellow sticky traps. They help with adults. They do absolutely nothing about the larvae already in the soil. A hydrogen peroxide soil drench eliminates fungus gnat larvae. The mechanism is direct. When that oxygen burst contacts the larvae in the soil, it kills them. It breaks the life cycle at the stage that matters. The adult population collapses within a generation because there are no larvae surviving to pupate. For this application, mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide with 4 parts water. Let the top inch of soil dry out first. You want the larvae close to the surface and active. Then drench the soil thoroughly. You will likely see fizzing at the surface, especially where there is organic material concentrated near the top. That fizzing is the oxidation reaction working. Apply every 5 to 7 days for 2 to 3 weeks until you see no more adults emerging from the soil. Right here, I want to stop for just a moment because I need to say something directly. Your local garden center is not going to walk you through hydrogen peroxide treatment protocols. The person in the orange apron at the big box store is working from a retail script. They know the products on the shelf and they benefit from you buying them. The gardening content you find on most platforms is produced by people who are paid by the same brands selling you those products. Let me be straight with you. If you have made it this far into this video, you are not a casual gardener. You are someone who wants real information and who is tired of spending money every single spring on products that were never really designed to solve your problem permanently. This channel exists for you. If you are not subscribed yet, I want you to hit that button right now. It is free. It is always going to be free. And every week I put out content built around giving you exactly what nobody else in this space is willing to say out loud. Subscribe, and then let us keep going because we are not close to done. The fourth use, root zone oxygenation and general soil health. This is the one that surprises people, and it is one of my favorites to explain because it connects to something that happens in nature that most gardeners have never thought about. Have you ever noticed how your plants seem to visibly perk up after a genuine thunderstorm? Not a light drizzle, a real downpour with lightning, and you probably attributed it to the rainfall. But here is what I want you to think about. Rainwater during a storm, particularly during lightning activity, carries dissolved oxygen and trace amounts of naturally occurring peroxides that form in the atmosphere and get carried to the ground in the rain. Plants evolved over millions of years in an environment where that kind of peroxide-enriched rainfall was a regular occurrence. The lift you see after a hard rain is partly about hydration, but it is also about oxygenation, about the root zone receiving a flush of oxygen that compacted, depleted growing medium cannot provide on its own. When you add hydrogen peroxide to your regular watering routine at very low concentrations, 4 tablespoons of 3% peroxide per liter of water, you are replicating what a good thunderstorm does naturally. The oxygen released in the soil stimulates root growth. Roots in an oxygen-rich environment are more metabolically active, more efficient at pulling in nutrients, and more resistant to the anaerobic conditions that allow root rot pathogens to move in. This is especially important for container plants, where soil compaction over time is almost inevitable, and for raised beds with heavier soil amendments that compress under repeated watering. The fifth use, sanitizing seeds before planting to improve germination speed and success rates. Think about every seed you have ever planted that just sat in the soil and refused to sprout. You waited the 2 weeks on the seed packet, nothing. You waited a third week, still nothing. You dug around in the soil to check. The seed was still there, swollen, but not germinated. That kind of failure can happen for several reasons: soil temperature, planting depth, moisture levels. But one of the most common and least talked about causes is surface contamination on the seed itself. Seeds harvested and packaged commercially can carry surface bacteria and mold spores. In the warm, moist environment of a germination tray, those organisms can outcompete the embryo before the seedling ever gets a foothold. Soaking seeds in diluted hydrogen peroxide before planting does 2 things that matter significantly. First, it sterilizes the seed surface. The oxidation reaction destroys bacteria and mold spores on the seed coat without harming the viable embryo inside. The embryo is protected. The pathogens are not. Second, the peroxide solution helps soften the seed coat. In nature, that outer layer breaks down through exposure to moisture, freeze-thaw cycles, or passage through an animal's digestive system. A brief peroxide soak accelerates that process artificially, which means the embryo can access moisture faster and germination speed improves in ways you will be able to measure. I have seen difficult seeds, old seeds, seeds with notoriously hard coats, germinate days earlier with a pre-soak than without one. Use 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water. Soak for no more than 30 minutes and plant immediately after. The sixth use, disinfecting tools, pots, and growing surfaces between seasons. Let me tell you something that experienced gardeners learn the hard way. Your tools are disease vectors. That pair of pruning shears you used on a rose with black spot last week. If you did not sanitize the blade before moving to the next plant, you spread the pathogen yourself, that container you used last season where a plant died of root rot. If you rinsed it out with water and refilled it with fresh potting mix, you did not eliminate the problem. The pathogen was still present on the inside surface of that pot, waiting for the right conditions to attack whatever you plant next. Hydrogen peroxide is one of the most effective and least toxic sanitizing agents you can use on garden equipment. It kills bacteria, viruses, mold spores, and fungal pathogens on contact. For pruning shears and cutting tools, wipe the blade with undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide between cuts when working with any diseased plant material. For containers, fill or spray them with a solution of 1 part 3% peroxide to 1 part water, let it sit for 10 minutes, and rinse. For greenhouse benches, propagation trays, and work surfaces, a pump sprayer application of the same solution wiped down before the season begins gives you a clean starting environment. Compare this to bleach, which is the other disinfectant most often recommended. Bleach works, but it leaves chlorine residue that is not neutral to roots. It corrodes metal tools over time, and you cannot use it anywhere near an actively growing plant without real risk of damage. Hydrogen peroxide leaves nothing behind. It breaks down. There is no residue concern. The seventh use, reusing and sterilizing old potting soil. Stop throwing away perfectly reusable growing medium out of fear about what might be in it. I want to be straight with you about something. There is a lot of money made from gardeners not knowing this. You can absolutely reuse potting soil, and hydrogen peroxide is what makes it safe to do so. Old potting medium, the soil from a container where a plant died, the soil from last year's tomato pots, a bag of mix from an unknown source, any of these can carry dormant fungal spores, insect eggs, harmful nematodes, and bacterial colonies that will attack whatever you plant into it next season. A single hydrogen peroxide drench destroys those pathogens, not reduces them, destroys them. Mix 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water and drench the growing medium thoroughly, making sure the solution moves through the entire volume. Then let it sit for 24 to 48 hours before planting into it. The peroxide will have fully broken down in that window, leaving behind nothing but water and extra oxygen in the soil. You are paying for fresh potting mix every single season when the solution is already sitting on your shelf for under $2. Now, I promised you at the top of this video that I would walk you through the complete rescue protocol for a plant that is failing. And here it is. Start by removing the plant from its container entirely. Gently shake or rinse away the excess soil from the root ball so you can see what you are working with. Healthy roots are white or cream-colored and firm. Deceased roots are dark, brown, black, gray, and they will feel soft or mushy when you press them between your fingers. A sour, swampy smell is a sign that anaerobic activity has been working underground for a while before you saw any symptoms above the soil line. Using pruning shears that you have wiped with undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide, cut away every root that is dark and mushy. Do not leave any infected tissue attached. An infected root that stays on the plant will keep spreading the pathogen into the remaining healthy root system. Cut it clean. Once the diseased roots have been removed, prepare a solution of 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 2 to 3 parts water in a clean container. Submerge the remaining healthy root system in that bath for 5 to 10 minutes. You will see fizzing. That is the oxidation reaction working. That is the peroxide destroying pathogens on the surface of the root tissue and pushing oxygen directly into the root cells. After the soak, gently pat the roots dry with a clean towel and repot the plant into fresh, well-draining growing medium. Not the same soil, fresh soil. You just clean the roots. Putting them back into infected soil is a waste of everything you just did. When you water for the first time after repotting, add a small amount of diluted peroxide to the water. A mild drench at the 4 tablespoon per liter ratio to disinfect the new soy soil and give the recovering root system an oxygen boost. Then exercise restraint. The #1 cause of root rot is overwatering. Let the soil dry out meaningfully between waterings going forward. Feel the weight of the container. If it feels light, water. If it still feels heavy, wait. Give the plant time to stabilize before you push it with fertilizer. A plant in recovery does not need nutrients forced at it. It needs its roots to function first. Before I close this out, I want to address 2 questions I hear from gardeners constantly. First, is hydrogen peroxide safe to use on vegetables and food-producing plants? Yes, unambiguously yes. Hydrogen peroxide breaks down into water and oxygen. There is no toxic residue. Nothing persists in the plant tissue or in the soil. You can apply it to tomatoes, peppers, herbs, leafy greens, and harvest from them without any concern about chemical contamination. This is in direct contrast to many synthetic fungicides and insecticides that carry pre-harvest intervals, mandatory waiting periods between the last application and when you can safely eat the crop. Hydrogen peroxide has no pre-harvest interval. It is gone before you could worry about it. That is not a marketing claim. That is chemistry. Second, what about beneficial soil organisms? The good bacteria, the mycorrhizal fungi, the earthworms that make healthy garden soil function the way it should. I want to be honest with you here because this is a real consideration. When you drench your soil with hydrogen peroxide, you are introducing an oxidizing agent, and it will affect some of the microbial life in the soil, including beneficial organisms. The key is concentration and frequency. At maintenance dilutions, the impact on beneficial soil biology is minimal and temporary. At the higher concentrations used for severe root rot rescue, you are making a deliberate trade. You are sacrificing some of the microbial community to save the plant. That is sometimes the right call. After a heavy treatment, you can support the recovery of beneficial soil biology by top dressing with compost, introducing a mycorrhizal inoculant, or applying a compost tea drench in the weeks following treatment. Think of it as a medical intervention. Sometimes you accept a side effect to address the more serious problem. Here's what I want to leave you with. Hydrogen peroxide is $1.50. The treatments they sell you at the garden center to address the problems hydrogen peroxide prevents and cures cost you $10, $15, $20 a season. Every season. Forever. That math is not complicated. You just needed someone to say it out loud. Drop your state in the comments right now. I read every single one of them. And if there is someone in your life who you know spends money every spring replacing plants that did not have to die, send them this video. The information we covered today will change the way they garden, and that is worth passing on. Now, go get that bottle out of your medicine cabinet. See you in the next one.